Welcome back, everyone, to the Truth and Freedom podcast, where awakening begins with asking the question most people are afraid to ask. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Amzallag, and this is not just another podcast. This is a journey into awareness, courage, and truth. Now, there's a moment in everyone's life when they realize that the loudest enemy they will ever face doesn't live outside of them. It lives in their own mind. It whispers doubts, amplifies fears, distorts reality, and makes you question your worth, your abilities, and your place in the world. It shows up as negative thinking, ongoing self-doubt, and what we've come to know as imposter syndrome. But here's the truth most people never hear. Just because the mind speaks doesn't mean it speaks the truth. Today, I want to explore what happens when your mind lies to you, why it lies, how those lies take root, and how you can reclaim your power from the inner critic that has held you hostage for far too long. Now, negative thinking doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins in the small, unnoticed moment where you were criticized instead of encouraged, dismissed instead of validated, compared instead of seen. It begins in classrooms, in family dynamics, in early relationships, where your mistakes were magnified and your strength were overlooked. Over time, those messages become internalized. They stop sounding like other people's voices and start sounding like your own. Now, imposter syndrome often grows out of the same soil. It tells you that you got lucky, that you don't truly belong, that someone will eventually discover you're not as capable as you may think. Even when you succeed, even when you achieve what you once prayed for, that voice follows you into every room, whispering that you're an outsider in your own life. It convinces you that your accomplishments are accidents, your talents are exaggerated, and your confidence is fraudulent. But here's the paradox of imposter syndrome. It affects the most competent people, not the incapable ones. The people who question themselves are often the ones who care deeply, who strive for excellence, who hold themselves to a higher standard. Self-doubt rarely attacks the unqualified. It attacks the one who wants to grow. And yet, despite this truth, the lies of the mind can become so convincing that we begin to treat them as facts. We catastrophize them. We assume worst-case scenarios. We tell ourselves stories about who we are and what we are capable of, without ever stopping to question whether those stories are even ours, whether they're echoes of a past wound rather than reflection of the present moment. So when the mind lies, it often does so with the intention of protection. The brain is wired to detect danger, not happiness. It is designed to keep you alive, not fulfilled. So when it senses risk, emotional, professional, relational, it often steps in with fear-based narrative that sound like warning, such as you're not ready, you're not worthy, you're going to fail, you're going to get hurt. And because those thoughts feel familiar, we start believing them. But healing begins when you learn to separate familiarity from truth. Familiar thoughts are always inaccurate thoughts. Just because the mind has repeated the same fear for years doesn't mean that fear is rooted in reality. It simply means that fear has been practiced, rehearsed so many times that it feels like your internal reprogramming. So to break free from negative thinking and self-doubt, you must become the observer of your mind, not the victim of it. You have to step back and say, I hear this thought, but I don't have to become this thought. You challenge the narrative. You ask for evidence. You call it the exaggeration, the distortion, the catastrophizing. You begin to recognize the pattern instead of falling into it. And slowly, the lies loses its power. So when you start questioning your thought instead of absorbing them, you gain something extraordinary, which is clarity. You begin to see that most of your fears never materialize. Most of your doubts were echoes of old wounds. Most of your negative self-talk was inherited, not chosen. And most importantly, you discover that your mind can be retrained. You can rewire the inner dialogue that once convinced you that you weren't enough. You can build new pathways, grounded in self-comparison, grounded in reality, grounded in the truth of your capability, not the illusion of your insecurity. Imposter syndrome fades not when you achieve more, but when you stop seeking external validation to confirm your internal worth. Negative thinking quiets not when life becomes easy, but when you learn to interrupt the cognitive habit that distorts your reality. And one day, you wake up and realize something profound. The voice in your head is no longer your enemy. It becomes your guide, your ally, your grounded companion. You hear fear, but you don't obey it. You experience doubt, but you don't shrink because of it. You notice negative thoughts, but you don't let them define you. Because now you know the truth. The mind is powerful, but it is not infallible. You're allowed to question it. You're allowed to correct it. You're allowed to rewrite the narrative. And in doing so, you discover your confidence, your clarity, and your freedom. That same freedom to step fully into the life you're always capable of living. So I'd like to thank you all for joining me today on today's episode. And also on episode 7, we'll explore the topic of family script and invisible obligation, how to rewrite your story. So if you're experiencing family struggles at this given moment, the next episode is catered to you and you wouldn't want to miss that one. Until then, my friend, stay awake, stay grounded, and stay free.